Layla Kassab first noticed something wrong when Ambassador Tierta's eyebrows knotted in sudden fury. Only 10 seconds earlier he had been smiling across the lacquered table at his opposite number from Caldria. The two men were trading formal niceties. Layla's simultaneous interpretation flowed from her throat in the calm, semi-mechanical cadence she used whenever she occupied a booth. When a ripple of tension moved through the conference hall, Tierta's hands curled into tight fists on the tabletop. Layla could hear his foot tapping through the floor microphones. She glanced at the screen in front of her. The original words she had heard in Reviton were uncomplicated. "We are eager to set aside the wounds of the past." She had rendered them in Caldrian, and then in a panoramic English feed for the assembly. There had been no threats, no veiled criticism. Yet Tierta's expression said he had heard something closer to provocation than conciliation. Across the aisle, the Revotan foreign minister, Saska Malin, was glaring back, as if insulted. A hush settled over the hall. The chair of the summit asked both delegations to suspend for a short recess. Layla removed her headset, palm suddenly slick. She knew she had translated correctly. She could see the waveform logs scrolling up her ancillary monitor. Still, something in the air had turned cordial words into barbed wire. Another interpreter, Bastian Krell, stuck his head through the curtain that separated their adjoining booths. His shirt collar was damp. "Did you get that?" he asked. "Get what?" "The tone. I was on the Yamik channel. 1 second the delegate was praising cooperation. The next, she sounded like she was accusing the Basin Alliance of sabotage." Layla exhaled. "I thought it was just me." They compared notes. The pattern was identical. Pacific phrasing into the microphone, agitation emerging from the speakers. Bastian shrugged as though unwilling to declare a mystery before the second coffee break. "Maybe we're all jumpy," he said. But Layla had spent a decade living inside languages, the way divers live inside water. She knew the feel of semantic currents, the eddies that pull nuance sideways. Something had shifted here, and the shift was not natural. She saved her audio logs onto a private drive, slipped out of the booth and crossed the corridor to the listening lounge, where aides and journalists filled paper cups from humming samovars. The delegates had been ushered to separate suites. Through a reinforced window she saw Ambassador Tierta, pacing in small squares, speaking to a cluster of advisors, all of them visibly angry. Her phone buzzed. It was an alert from the summit software. The plenary was rescheduled for 900 the next morning to allow the parties to revisit their opening statements. A polite way of saying the first encounter had almost blown apart the peace process before it began. Layla found her supervisor, a broad-shouldered Romani linguist named Ioan Plezu, gesturing at a flight of stairs. "Come," he said, "we're having a post-mortem." They gathered in a small room whose only decoration was a whiteboard covered in overlapping arrows. Which interpreter served which language pair? Which delegate could understand which fallback tongues? Which channels fed which headphones? 30 people crammed around a table for 10. "Let's hear it," Plezu said. "Did anyone mistranslate?" Nobody spoke. At last Layla raised her hand. "The logs matched the transcripts. The oddity isn't in what we said, it's in what was heard." An older woman from the tech division shook her head. "There's no latency, no glitch in the relay, packet capture clean." "But the reactions were wrong," Bastian insisted. "Either the delegates misheard or—" he rubbed his forehead. "Don't laugh. Something in the language is twisting." A low murmur passed through the room. Interpreters were allergic to mysticism. Language was craft, not sorcery. And yet the evidence pressed in on all sides. The chair ended the meeting with instructions to rest and return fresh. Layla did not rest. She led herself down quiet corridors to the archive room, keyed in her multi-layer credentials and reproduced the audio. She cued both the source and her simultaneous interpretation in 2 separate channels, listening with studio headphones. The sentences aligned perfectly. Conjugations, honorifics, register spot on. But when she toggled to the hall recording, something uncanny appeared. A faint modulation behind her voice, almost too subtle to notice, like a harmonic shadow. She isolated a 4-second sample and ran a spectrum analysis. There it was. a filament of frequencies riding just above the audible threshold, weaving micro-echoes into the vowels, had not been present in the booth feed. Somewhere between her mouth and the delegate's earpieces, the signal had acquired a parasite. The summit's translation system was layered. Each interpreter's channel went through a digital switchboard, which mixed, compressed, and distributed the streams. That hardware sat in a steel cabinet 1 floor below. Layla descended. At this hour, the security guard was gone. Shift change, and the door was propped open. Bands hummed inside. She pulled out her phone light and examined the patch panel. A slender black unit the size of a cigarette package was clipped to the main outgoing cable bundle. No label, no manufacturer's mark, just a blinking green diode. Footsteps in the hall. She replaced the cable trunk and stepped out. A man in maintenance coveralls nodded at her. Pushing a cart stacked with bottled water, she nodded back and kept walking, heart drumming. On the elevator ride, she rehearsed how she would explain to security that someone had inserted unauthorized hardware into the translation matrix, injecting aggression into their words. It sounded insane. She considered confiding in Plessu, but remembered the cardinal rule of crisis linguistics. Evidence first, accusation second. So she copied her audio samples onto a flash stick, pocketed it, and went to her hotel room. That night, she dreamed in a half-dozen languages at once, each one arguing with the others, a babble of clashing cadences. She woke 2 hours before dawn, shaved ice pouring through her veins. At 700, she met Bastian in the cafeteria. He carried 2 paper cups of strong black coffee. They sat. She told him everything, including the mystery device. He stared, unblinking, until she finished. Then he whispered, "Show me." The security door required a badge and numeric code. Layla's credentials covered equipment bays, but Bastian's did not, so she swiped for both of them. The tiny module was still there, glued like a barnacle to the trunk. Bastian knelt, traced the coax into the black box. He opened his phone's camera and switched to infrared. The box bloomed pale on the screen. "I've seen similar in PsyOps demos," he said. "A mimetic filter. Real-time lexical shift with emotional tilt." A lexical what? Imagine a thesaurus built for mood manipulation. You feed it a sentence, it chooses synonyms that skew the listener's interpretation. Now imagine it works in subaudible overlay. The conscious mind hears your literal translation, but the limbic system hears a nudge toward hostility. Layla felt cold pricks across her scalp. Be pro-Messerazed semantics. Exactly. Someone wants this summit to fail. The building's intercom chimed. 15-minute security sweep. Bastian unclipped the black box and slipped it into Layla's canvas tote. They exited just before 2 guards rounded the corner. Back in her hotel room, they cracked the unit open with a utility knife, a microprocessor, a modulator board, and a flash memory card. The card was encrypted, but Bastian's laptop carried some heavy toolkits from his prior life in military intelligence. 20 minutes later, they were staring at line after line of transformation tables, triggers, synonyms, amplitude settings. The biases leaned consistently toward belligerence. "It's modular," Bastian muttered. "The Slotsy would hold filters for other moods. Somebody chose aggression." "Can we reverse it?" Layla asked. "Maybe. We could invert the tables so every aggressive nuance becomes pacifying. But if we do nothing and just remove the box, whoever installed it might notice and trigger a backup plan. And if they inverted the table?" Layla pictured delegates lapsing into unnatural euphoria, agreeing to concessions their parliaments would never ratify. A peace forged in biochemical fraud would shatter at first stress. He paced. What if we neutralize the filter completely, turn every modifier to 0, essentially render it mute? Bastian scratched his beard. Safer, but the hardware's still in line. If our saboteur inspects the logs, he'll just see normal traffic. He closed the lid. We can do it, but we'll have to get the card back in place before the plenary. They spent the next 2 hours reprogramming. Layla worked the linguistics side, identifying each semantic pair, ensuring the null state would not produce gibberish. Bastian wrote a quick checkdown routine that would fool any remote test into reading valid output. At 8:45, they walked the module back to the cabinet and reinstalled it. 20 seconds later, 2 technicians strolled past, chatting about basketball, oblivious. Layla's pulse hammered as she climbed the stairs to her booth. The delegations filed in Turda with a brisk nod, Malin with diplomatic frostiness, the rest wearing publicly neutral masks. Overhead lights relit the giant oval table. When the chair invited opening remarks, Layla braced. She listened to Malin speak in soft Ravotan. She echoed the message in Cauldrian, layering it into English. No undertow vibrated in her translation. On the large-screen biometric monitors showed Malin's blood pressure steady, Turtaw's heart rate modest. Around the hall, shoulders relaxed. A collective exhale drifted up like incense. The summit recommenced. Over the next 4 hours, Layla ferried fragile meaning across linguistic trenches. Some sentences came bristling with decades-hardened suspicion, but they came by design, not corruption. Even rancor felt honest compared to yesterday's warped mimicry. By late afternoon, the delegations agreed on a framework. They would break for 48 hours to consult their governments and reconvene for signatures. As the hall emptied, Layla allowed herself a ragged grin, until she saw a man in maintenance coveralls cross the doorway, head craned toward the booth. The same man from the day before. Their eyes locked for an instant. He turned away. "Bastion," she hissed into her private intercom. "We've been spotted." They met in the garden courtyard, where fountains muffled conversation. Bastion had copied the sabotage logs onto another drive. "We'll check the device tonight," he said. "When he finds the filter neutered, he'll push an escalation." Layla rubbed her temples. "We need evidence solid enough for security, or else this becomes our word against his." Bastion's eyes flicked to the fountain. "Let's give him evidence he can't ignore. We'll bait him." He proposed a plan. Trick the saboteur into reinstalling the aggression profile himself while they routed the entire summit audio to a private recorder, capturing his interference in flagrante. Then they would present it to the neutral Swiss security contingent, the only authority every delegation trusted. At midnight, they returned to the cabinet, extracted the flash card, replaced it with a blank loaded with a benign test file. They knew the saboteur would come to diagnose the faulty filter. Next, they set up a discrete Wi-Fi access point piggybacking on the interpreter network. Every packet passing through the black box would mirror to Bastion's laptop 2 rooms away. Finally, they reset the cabinet lock and waited. At 200, Layla crouched in a darkened side office. Saw the corridor light flick on. Through a cracked door, she watched the maintenance man kneel by the cabinet, unscrew the panel, curse softly. He withdrew the dummy card, rummaged in his pocket, and produced another. When he inserted it, Bastion's laptop beeped. Lines of captured data poured across the screen. The aggression tables, time-stamped by his login. The man resecured the panel and walked out. Layla's breathing slowed. They stayed until footsteps faded, then collected the new card the way crime scene techs lift fingerprints, gloves, evidence sacks, photographed in situ. At dawn, they stood before a Swiss major in a cramped security bureau. The major had salt and pepper hair and the skeptical stare of someone who had seen too many manufactured outrages. Bastion laid out the evidence, the parasitic hardware, the duplicate filter files with matched checksums, the intrusion footage from a ceiling camera the saboteur had missed, the time-synced Wi-Fi packet captcha. The major listened without comment, thumb whirring the corner of a notebook. When Bastien finished, Layla spoke. "I'm not asking you to arrest him on our say-so," she said. "But if that box stays online, tomorrow's session will revert to hostility. We removed its effect yesterday. Today we show you proof it was restored." The major tapped his notebook, then turned to an aide. "Get me Colonel Fisher," he ordered, "and confiscate the translation relay. Summit proceedings go on hold until we certify neutrality." Within an hour, the cabinet was sealed. The maintenance man, real name Reinhard Spivak, an outside contractor hired for AV support, was detained while investigators parsed his devices. The delegations received a terse communiqué that technical checks would delay the final session by 6 hours. To Layla's surprise, no one balked. After decades of war, they could wait half a day for a clean signal. Layla paced the lobby's polished marble, She ran thought experiments on every known language vector by which aggression could hide. Morphosyntax, phonemic echo, cross-cultural metaphor. She found herself murmuring prayers in her grandmother's Lebanese dialect, prayers that navigated decades of strife without ever naming an enemy. By late afternoon, the Swiss major returned. "The contractor won't talk," he said, "but we traced his payment channel to a shell company fronting the same arms consortium that sells to both sides of this conflict." Layla expected triumphant relief. Instead, she felt a hollow ache. Of course. The oldest formula: prolong the war, sell more guns. The major continued. "We replaced the trunk cable entirely, no hidden hardware. We'll run dual authentication on every audio packet. The summit reconvenes at 1800. Layla asked permission to inspect the new setup. The major agreed. She and Bastian walked the length of the hall, scanning each translator feed. Clean. As she climbed into her booth, a hush fell over the assembly. Delegates reappeared, wariness tempered by a fragile optimism. Layla's heart hammered behind her ribs. She knew how quickly hope could shatter. The chair spoke first. Simple words about the value of truth, of trust. No echo. Revotan Delegate Malin addressed the chamber. "Yesterday we saw the power of misunderstanding. Let us remember who profits when we fail." Heads nodded around the table. One by one, confessions of fear and regret surfaced, stitched with promises not to return to bombs and blockades. Layla carried their words across tongues like a gentle tide. When the penultimate speaker, Ambassador Turda, rose, his throat trembled. "For 27 years, my countrymen have buried their dead from this war. Today I ask you to join me in ending it." Applause roared, tear-streaked cheeks that had once scowled. Layla's vision blurred. She kept translating through the wetness. Paper rustled, thick with embossed seals. Signatures blossomed under fountain pens. Flashbulbs popped. Outside the tall windows, evening sunlight cut through high clouds, painting long REH shafts over the floor. The summit ended in standing ovation. Diplomats shook hands, aides hugged, journalists rushed to broadcast the historic truce. Layla unplugged her headset, letting silence fill her ears. Bastian slipped into the booth. "We pulled it off," he whispered. She nodded but did not smile. "How long will it last?" "As long as they choose to honor it," he said. "Freedom isn't a software patch." They left the booth together. In the corridor, a junior interpreter sprinted by, clutching an urgent cable. She would be translating the press release into half a dozen world languages. Layla offered a tired thumbs up, but as the young woman receded, Layla caught a flicker of doubt in her own mind. She replayed a phrase from the peace treaty just signed. "We shall strive for lasting security by any and all necessary means." The wording was standard diplomatic boilerplate, yet it contained the seeds of future loopholes. Necessary means could be read as weapons, as force, as preemptive strikes. Language she knew was never finally safe. It could be bent without electronic parasites, twisted by fear, by ambition, by the echo chambers of public opinion. The treaty's ink was still wet, and already the possibility of war slept inside its sentences like a dormant virus. She inhaled and squared her shoulders. That vulnerability, she realized, was precisely why her profession mattered. Peace was not a document. It was a translation, renewed every day, so languages feel between memories, between private grief and public reconciliation. The moment the words failed, the guns would start speaking again. Bastian touched her elbow. "You coming to the reception?" "In a minute," she said. She walked back into the now empty hall, stood in the very center where the translators' voices had converged. The session lights dimmed above. She imagined tomorrow's headlines: children waking to a future unstained by fresh shells, factories retooled from munitions to tractors. She allowed herself to believe. Then she whispered, in each of the summit tongues, the simplest, most fragile syllables she knew: "Stay." The hall carried the echoes softly, as if accepting the plea. Perhaps, she thought, intentions could be nudged toward peace just as surely as they had been pushed toward war, but not through concealed devices or coercive harmonics, through vigilance, through honesty. through the ceaseless labor of translation that kept meaning faithful to the breath that birthed it. She exhaled, left the hall, and walked toward the reception where the work of safeguarding words, todays and tomorrows, would begin again.